Welcome to the EV Ready podcast, featuring industry leaders and their perspectives on electrification, hosted by EV Ready Energy. Hey everybody, welcome to the EV Ready podcast. I am grateful to have on today Marissa Galizia, the Senior Director of Partnerships at Voltus, what I think is one of the most interesting topics in the industry right now. Marissa, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me on. Excited
Awesome.
to talk with you.
Yeah. Obviously, we know each other and have worked with each other in the past. And I so think that your new role at your new company really fits who you are and what you do. And so I'm excited to talk to you about Voltus and what you're doing in your new role today. So I'll kind of jump into it. So first question for you, I think the utility grid is like this thing that the lights turn on and 99% of the population obviously is just focused on, hey, are the lights on? But the grid's this really complex living organism, and that's what you're living in every day now. So can you help everybody understand how does the grid run? What is an independent service operator? What is a utility? How do they work together? And what are their roles in the grid in North America today?
Yeah, great questions. And definitely something that is not well understood, I would say, by most people that put on the lights every day. So an independent system operator is really responsible for making sure that supply equals demand on the grid. So they're managing all of the transmission lines that actually bring the power from the generation sources to the distribution level lines that are actually managed by the utilities, which bring the power into your home. So the two kind of work together, but the independent system operator is working at sort of the larger scale. There are 9 energy markets or independent system operators around North America that we work with and that are using demand response to help balance supply and demand on the grid.
And so can you help people understand what happens if the grid isn't balanced? If it's not perfectly balanced all day, what happens?
Blackouts. That's basically what it is, right? So they have to make sure that there's a continuous balance to avoid, people not having access to power.
Yeah, totally. And so would it be fair to characterize an independent service operator, their job is to balance the grid, and then a utility's job is to they're like a construction company. Their job's to manage the infrastructure that's out there.
Yeah, especially more at the local level, like the distribution level. And they also manage measuring, making sure that they know, how much each home is using and charging everybody for it and keeping the infrastructure at that distribution level all up and running.
Cool. So talk to us about the biggest challenges that these companies face if they don't balance the grid and keep all of the lines up and running.
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest challenges that's happening today is just we're seeing increased demand. So for a long time, actually, we were sort of having so much energy efficiency progress that we weren't necessarily seeing growth in demand. But now with AI and data centers and electrification of everything, demand is really starting to increase again on the grid, which is putting strain on these companies to have to either bring on more generation, build out more transmission capacity, which are both kind of time intensive and expensive propositions, or find ways of balancing and getting more efficient in other ways, which virtual power plants can be a solution to. Yeah. And I think the other sort of result of that is increased prices, right? So if these companies have to, invest in more transmission and more generation, that's all going to end up getting, rate-based added to bills. Especially we're going to see increased capacity charges on energy bills.
So effectively, you're helping the grid become more resilient, more economic, and more sustainable. Is that
That is very well said.
Okay.
Yeah, like rather than, bringing on more gas generators, we're basically helping them using less energy to fulfill the demand and keep costs down and save, reduce carbon emissions while we're at it.
Yeah. This is the thing that I'm most passionate about is your job. I think the resiliency of the grid, the economics around EV charging is, our company always talks about is like not understood within the industry. And then obviously there are so many sustainability initiatives that like I think it's just for really rewarding what you're doing. And the idea of like, instead of, I always like say to customers when I'm talking about this, like, instead of turning on that coal fired power plant at 5 p.m. on the 4th of July, like if you can come up with like a creative solution where a company like yours is doing what they're doing and you don't have to do that, like you're kind of checking off all the boxes at the same time. And it really is the future. I think it's exciting.
I mean, and what you just said about like those peak times is so important because yes, like demand is definitely growing, but then like really where demand response helps is that like there are these relatively few like really big peaks during the hottest days and the coldest days of the year. And that's where demand response can really help, drastically reduce the investment that we would need to cover like those peaks.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, in terms of your passion about the topic, I fully obviously agree. But I think especially, for both of us and for a lot of the listeners of this podcast, really passionate about EVs and, starting to fuel the world on electricity instead of gas. And, we all kind of want to build out the infrastructure to be able to do that. But then like having the capacity, the electrical capacity there to support that build out is such an important piece. And definitely why I kind of got into this space after working in EVs for so long as well.
I think once what you do is understood, the topic of EVs becomes less like political, less partisan. Once people kind of realize like how it's going to impact the grid in different ways beyond like kind of what's traditionally understood. So kudos to you. I love that. It's awesome. Can you talk to us like in kind of explain in the most basic terms possible, like what is demand response and how does it actually play out in the wild today?
So demand response is basically getting people to reduce their energy consumption at times of peak demand on the grid. So the independent system operators that we talked about before see that there's going to be an increase in demand. So they will send a notification out to, demand response providers like Voltus. And we will and also to like typical generators and, generators and VPPs will sort of bid into that and say, okay, we can be there, we can perform.
What's a VPP?
A virtual power plant.
Okay. And how would you define what a virtual power plant is? Because most people they just know what a power plant is.
Yeah, it's an aggregation of power users. Distributed energy resources is the other kind of term people use a lot that can be sort of bid into an energy market and dispatched at a particular time to help balance the grid, as we've just been talking about. So just as you would turn on a traditional power plant, you could also turn on basically a virtual power plant and send a notification to all of the participants in that virtual power plant to reduce their energy consumption during the event.
Awesome. And how do end users who have that capacity benefit from reducing their power at certain times?
So these independent system operators would normally have to pay for energy, right? So they're willing to pay for people to not use energy instead of paying for energy. So they pay Voltus or other virtual power plant aggregators, and then we would pass on a portion of that revenue to the people that participate. And so it's a great way for people who have flexibility in their energy consumption to make additional revenue while supporting their local grid and the climate.
Awesome. And can you talk about in the past, like what of the traditional customers that you've worked with or that Voltus has worked with? Like, what are the traditional types of customers that have participated in demand response in the past? And then the second question to that is like, why could they participate? Like, what about their load profile or their business allowed them to participate in programs?
So demand response has been happening for years. There's been traditionally like large CNI customers that have participated where they have, manufacturing processes that have flexibility to turn off certain processes, or, large HVAC systems or lighting or other electrical systems that can be sort of turned down during these events. More and more, though, we're seeing these kind of smaller distributed energy resources like EVs, batteries, residential. So like smart home devices and smart thermostats are a really big one that we're starting to see and starting to be able to aggregate and use as a virtual power plant as well.
So like you said, like there's a bunch of new technologies that are coming online right now beyond commercial industrial customers in the past. Utilities are having to they're having to advance and I guess allow like new technologies, new customers to participate. And I imagine my guess is in the future, 10 years from now, like we're only going to see utilities get better at this. Can you talk about like where utilities are today with this, where you see them going, and what the challenges are there trying to, I guess, get the world to evolve to a demand response solution as opposed to other methods of balancing the grid?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a wide range of approaches across the country where there are some utilities that do have their own demand response programs. There are others that don't. One of the interesting things about the way that Voltus operates in particular is that it's sort of above the utility level, right? We're interacting directly with the independent system operators. And so whether or not the local utility wants to have a demand response program, in a lot of cases, doesn't matter. There are definitely a lot of cases where it still does. But, that's also something that like from a policy perspective is like a work in progress. And there's a lot of positive kind of policy momentum towards just like opening up more and more states and more parts of the country to be able to do demand response sort of regardless of if the local utility is on board with it or not. In all cases, the utility in some cases needs to participate because they need to help provide data that we can actually use to demonstrate the impact of the demand response events. So there's always going to be some interaction with utilities, but it is like a very interesting dynamic between, a lot of utilities that may not want to kind of change their ways and move towards this new way of working super quickly. And then like the kind of higher level policy pressures that are starting to come that are kind of pushing everybody in that direction.
Can you talk about like momentum in well, first explain what a deregulated energy market is, and then what momentum you're having in the deregulated markets versus in the other markets, and kind of like what the challenge is there between the two?
Yeah, what people often refer to as like a deregulated market, right, is a market where there's competition, where there's retail electricity competition, and you can have different suppliers sort of competing to be able to provide that distribution level power to consumers and businesses. And yes, those are the markets that are also open for demand response. Typically, it's those deregulated markets which have these independent system operator structures where we can participate in demand response, which today, like it covers most of the country, but there are large areas like in the Southeast and sort of like, the West, between the Midwest and California, where we can't really, there's no structure in place for a demand response market yet. But that's what, we have a policy team, and there's a lot of policy organizations around the country that are kind of constantly working on advocating for the ability to have that kind of a dynamic in those markets going forward. So they're making progress. Like we've had, just recently, like in the past couple of years, a few states have opened up, like Wisconsin just opened up this year to enable demand response. Michigan and Missouri also, like within the past couple of years, have just opened up to demand response as well. So we're definitely seeing positive momentum in that direction.
It sounds so similar to the EV industry. And
yes.
I guess this must be like the energy industry in general, like where obviously like utilities were these monopolies that controlled everything. And, anytime that you're adding, I don't know, change to a monopolistic business, there's going to be pushback. And it just feels like the pushback is very similar to what we were doing in EV.
Totally. They finally got every state to allow charging per kilowatt hour for electric vehicle charging. So, it can be done.
Yeah, it's going to be a long journey. I think it's interesting because we obviously work with like a lot of the different utilities and know some of the folks that are really advocates of deregulation. And it's just, I guess like anything else, there's the Northeast, California, certain parts of the middle of the country, like they've just taken like a certain approach, and some other parts have been slower. But hopefully, not just your company, but your industry will continue to create momentum so that end users can benefit from this.
Yeah, and I definitely see it happening. I think having more and more conversations like this happening around the country, and bringing awareness to the potential and the challenges will definitely help kind of pick that momentum up.
Yeah. So going back to like, there were commercial industrial customers. Now you're getting into EV and battery storage. Can you talk about like, if you had a customer who, let's just say like they're building loads like 150 kilowatts, they have a battery installed, they're in Massachusetts, maybe they have solar as well. Can you just talk about like how you would kind of approach a customer like that to help them understand how they would participate in a program that would send them a check in the mail without them like affecting their business operations?
Yeah. So we would start out with understanding their business operations, right? What do they need electricity for? What are their biggest electrical systems? When do they need it? What kind of operational flexibility do they have, right? And then we have a series, in every market, there are a series of different programs. One of the things that Voltus does really well is stacking multiple programs on top of each other, or weaving multiple programs together throughout the year, because some are just in certain seasons and some are in other seasons, to basically maximize the amount of revenue or energy savings that we can generate for a customer. But that starts with understanding the operations of the site or the business, and understanding their flexibility, and then matching them with the programs that are going to work best for them. And we work together to figure out a nomination, or like how much we think they'll be able to curtail in a demand response event. And, we'll figure out an estimate based on that about what we expect them to be able to earn. And then help them make a decision. Okay, so if this amount of revenue is worth it to them, to be able to just be a little bit flexible about, what electricity they're using and when at different times of the day or different times of the year. And usually it's not a really big commitment. Most of the programs are a few hours a year, basically. And we kind of help them understand the pros and cons of that, or like the benefits, the costs and benefits of that. And then they'll sign up. And from there, we'll make it really easy for them. So, to the extent that we can automate, we'll always, automate, like integrate with building management systems, energy management systems, EV charging systems, to make it really seamless, that like you could really kind of set it and forget it. But then where there are processes that just can't be automated, we also do have like a manual process where we'll call and coach facility managers about, okay, there's an event happening now, so here's your curtailment plan that we agreed to go through when there's an event, and they'll go do it. So it's it's interesting because we're definitely at this point where there's a ton of automation and even AI going into like watching systems and understanding when they're on and when they're off and what that means in terms of how much we should be bidding into the market for that customer. And then at the same time, there's still a bunch of loads out there that are not automated and that we're kind of just working with on a manual basis. And that is actually also effective.
And so I was speaking with a certain state, and when I was reviewing their demand response program, they mentioned that the way that they pay the end user out, like their goal is only to create resiliency for the grid, where there are other states that they're focused on resiliency, but they might also be making calls based off of like economics. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like how are states or utilities like building their programs in general? Like, what are you seeing like the main focus to be? Is it generally resiliency?
Well, so there are programs that I guess there's a few different buckets of programs. So there are capacity programs, which I guess you would call those like resiliency programs, where it's like, like what we talked about at the beginning, like you need to make sure that supply equals demand. So we want to make sure that we have capacity available to dispatch if needed. We also do see a lot of price response programs, which might be what you're talking about, where it's
Yeah,
like,
they are. Yeah.
you can set like a strike price that you're like interested in curtailing if the price is above that. And so then we would basically send you a dispatch if we think that you could earn more than that amount of money by or like that you could save more than that amount of money by stopping your energy use for that period of time. And then there are also what we call like ancillary services or operating reserves type programs. Those tend to be like more like quick balancing events. So those will be shorter duration and also like short notification. Like maybe you'll find out 10 minutes or maximum like 30 minutes before an event. And you'll just have to kind of turn down your electrical use for 20, 30 minutes. So it's like a really kind of quick balancing event. And then we also have a program that we've developed kind of from scratch called Carbon Response, which helps to reduce electricity use at times of high energy carbon intensity on the grid.
Nice.
So we will like just send a message saying, oh, carbon intensity is high right now. Can you, curtail your energy usage?
That's really cool. So just to dive into that, like you said, that's a program for you, for Voltus. Like, how do you participate with like end users in the utilities? Like, are you just, if you can see that energy is going to be cleaner in a short period of time, but it's the same price, you make that decision? Or is there actually like regulatory involvement in the idea of that type of program?
So for Carbon Response, we're actually working more with like corporate sponsors that are buying. They're basically interested in it because they're kind of able to offset their emissions offset their emissions by kind of saying that we're reducing carbon emissions. So it's like almost another way of buying a REC, for example. So that one's not actually working directly with a utility or energy market. It's like something that Voltus
It's
has
a creative
really
solution.
set up.
With that's cool.
Corporate sponsors. And in terms of like how it works together, I think that's kind of part of the other part of the question you were asking is like, how do we kind of stack these programs on top of each other to make sure that like you're dispatching because of carbon response, but also because of pricing. And that's kind of like where we have this, the Voltus platform, which is constantly monitoring all of these different inputs and making decisions about what is the right time and the best time to be dispatching different customers in the different programs that they're enrolled in. And we have a team of energy markets experts that's kind of driving the intelligence of that.
Got it. That's the special sauce right there. Cool. And so I guess last thing for you, can you talk about EV Ready and Voltus and our partnership and what we're looking to do together going forward to bring demand response to customers that own EV charging stations across North America?
Yeah, I'm really excited about our new partnership with EV Ready. As I mentioned before, it's natural that as you're putting more EV chargers into the ground, you're driving up capacity costs and energy costs. And it just is a really natural fit to then work with demand response to not only reduce the costs, but also generate revenue that can help offset, the overall cost of the project. So yeah, I know EV Ready is going to be kind of electrifying dealerships and fleets across the country. And so Voltus is excited to work with EV Ready to kind of enroll the sites in demand response programs that will help save energy costs and earn revenue.
And just for context for everybody, like I couldn't be more excited about this. I think this is some version of my why. I think it's not partisan. Everybody wants to be more resilient, more economic, and as it relates to like our grid that's 100 years old. And our space generally in the EV world, it's so unique because the load profile of EV charging stations in many cases where people are installing these are like 3, 4, 5 times the load profile of their buildings. And it's really causing an impact tied to utility rates. And so, part of balancing the grid, there's a mechanism around that of like lowering operational costs, lowering how much you have to pay the utility. But we're excited to work with Voltus and with Marissa. And so, yeah, that's awesome. It's really exciting and looking forward to working with you guys to really make like an impact on the utility grid and help end users look at the utility a little bit differently.
Yeah. I mean, I think when people realize, well, especially auto dealerships, right, who are kind of putting in this new technology and may be uncertain about like the costs that might be associated with that. But then learning that there's this whole other element that can support this investment and, not only make it more economical for them, but also kind of, as you were just saying, Chris, like make it be even more beneficial to the grid, the local community, the environment. I think that will really resonate.
Yeah, from my perspective, like I think, in this world where, everyone's kind of divided about EVs because it's such a political topic, I think, this is the vehicle that I want to use to help everybody understand like why electric vehicles can actually be better for the grid, why it's not always a hindrance on the grid, and some of the, energy solutions that you can do to, be more sustainable, be more economic, be more resilient without necessarily having to make major investments. Sometimes I guess work smarter, not harder is what this is and what you're doing. I love that.
It's exactly what this is. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Marissa, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate you coming on and look forward to continuing to make an impact, utilizing what you guys are doing and some of the technology that we're developing on our side.
Yeah. Thank you. I can't wait. Also.
Awesome.